Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Chrisicisms Conversations. About a year ago, Miranda came to our church to talk about her new TV show, Creative Icons, which she has produced with Scott Magie. This is a great show. It talks about Christians in the arts. It has interviews with film writers, filmmakers, dancers, and musicians, and it talks about the important work of being created to create. I had the pleasure to sit down with Anne and Scott recently to celebrate the premiere of the first 3 episodes and to talk about their devotional, Unveil and Unleash Your Creative Purpose, which is a guide that will take you through those first 3 videos over the course of 6 weeks. This was a great conversation. It's a conversation I think has been long needed in churches, so I'm really excited to see the work that Anne and Scott are doing. I really highly recommend this series. I highly recommend the devotional. I'm enjoying doing these Chrisicisms conversations. I think it's a great way to sit down and talk to people who are doing great work in these spaces. And I'm looking forward to doing more of them in the future. So if you like them, remember to hit subscribe, share with your friends, and comment. For now, I hope you'll enjoy this interview with Anne Miranda and Scott Magie. With me today are Anne Miranda and Scott Magie. Anne is an actor, a host, a producer of Creative Icons, and a chaplain to the arts. Scott is a writer and filmmaker, also involved with Creative Icons. And they are here to talk to us today about that project. I've had the pleasure of watching the first 3 episodes of Creative Icons. I love what you guys are doing here, so thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Yay, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for watching it.
So I understand you guys just had your premiere party a few weeks ago, right?
Yes, we did.
How did that go?
It was great. We had it at the Grand Ledge Sun Theater, which is an old art house theater in Grand Ledge, Michigan. And we interspersed some local artists doing their thing with it. And we had a great time. It was great. We premiered episode 3 on that one.
Fun to see it on the big screen.
It was fun.
I bet. And I love that you also had an online option too, where people could still be involved. I was really hoping to do that, and then my wife and son came back from Washington D.C. on a trip, and I'm like, oh, I should probably spend some time with them. But
Family first.
Yeah, I first heard about Creative Icons almost a little over a year ago. Anne, was it that you came to our church and talked about it?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what this project is?
Creative Icons is a docuseries that's about finding your creative purpose. And we do that by interviewing artists, faith, who are doing their work as a calling, but not necessarily doing it in a sacred space, but doing it in the secular world. So we feel like the church has done a decent job of worship and evangelism in the arts, but the church as a whole, there are some churches like yours, actually, Chris, it sounds like, who are doing a great job of supporting the arts, but historically, especially in the Protestant church, just haven't encouraged artists to pursue their calling as much as maybe the church should be encouraging people to pursue their calling. And so this docuseries was kind of came out of a place of, I would say, frustration and hope for Anne and I as artists in the church. I'm a pastor's kid, and she's been in the church her whole life, and yeah, there's a need for people to understand that just as the mission field needs missionaries, the arts world needs artists, and we are called to create by our Creator as being made in His image. So that was a long elevator
That's
speech.
a long. I was going to say that's many stories that we.
That was going up many flights, but don't get me going.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I grew up so we attend a church now where, yes, they're very involved with the arts. We've got an artist collective we're standing up in the area that I am really excited about. But growing up, I grew up in many flavors of Baptist church. And I remember my dad having to sign a form when I was about 9 or 10. He was a deacon, and we could not enter a movie theater. You could watch stuff at home, I guess, as long as you fast forwarded through everything. But my mom had to sneak me into the Care Bears movie when I was about 10 years old. I remember my mom sitting down. I've told this before, but my mom sitting me down about the same age, and she got a letter in the mail from her church and said, Chris, I want you to promise me you are never going to go see this movie that says some bad things about Jesus. And it was The Last Temptation of Christ. And I'm 10 years old. Like I want to see Oliver and Company. I want to see Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I'm not, but there was this idea that going into a movie theater would be dangerous. My dad was the music director at our church, and he was very cautious about letting us listen to any music that wasn't Christian, contemporary Christian music, even Christian rap. He was kind of a little askance on for a bit. So I think there has long been a need for that. Was there an impetus that made this project, you two come together and say, this is what we need to do, and let's start exploring how we have this conversation?
Yeah, we met. We had done a couple little projects together. We were just reminiscing at our premiere that it's been like 10 years almost, or around 10 years that we've known each other. I acted in one of his films that he did in one of his projects, and he does film camps with students, and so that was sort of fun. I got a chance to play a teacher. But we wound up having discussions as we would bump into each other about church and the arts, and this whole conversation about that there are Christians that are called to use their gifts, but the church isn't really getting them. They're not supporting them in their endeavors. Now, if they wanted to produce religious things that can be used for evangelism, or something that's a Christian music, Christian movie, that was encouraged. But I remember getting I was a singer first, and an actor, and I remember telling people at my church when I was younger that I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be a theater performer or a singer, and they were saying, "Well, you could be the next Sandy Patty. That's what you can do." We'll encourage you and support you in that. And I said, no, I kind of want to go to Broadway and do musical theater. And they're like, oh no, that's the evil place. You're not allowed to go there. So that from the very beginning, we both, Scott and I, had discussions like that. Like, well, why not? And even my husband, we've been married 34 years, and he, at the beginning of our marriage, was like, why do you want to go and do these shows? Some of these things are not good, and they're not promoting Christianity. They're not promoting Jesus. They're not good for anything but telling a story about some person that's doing weird things or whatever. And I said, well, if I don't shine the light in places like that, how is anybody going to know that Christians aren't full of baloney? I need to show up and be Jesus in a space that isn't a church. So in a way, like Scott had mentioned earlier, we connected on that because he was a pastor's kid and had similar experiences.
Yeah, I got to say, one reason I love Anne is because she says full of baloney, and I say the other one. But, but
Censored.
but no, I had, I was going to be an architect. I was kind of like, that was my passion, literally. Like my middle school, high school years, nobody knew what they were doing with their life, but I knew, and I was going to be an architect. And then I got to college and I saw Dead Man Walking. I was blessed to be a college student during the years when Dead Man Walking, Braveheart, Forrest Gump, Immortal Beloved, like all these movies came out, like Shawshank Redemption, like they all came out within a couple year span. And, I was at that movie going age where I'm going to all of them. But when Dead Man Walking came out, it was life changing for me because I saw that the gospel could be shown on screen in a way that was accessible for secular audiences, but also true to the word of scripture. And I was like, that's what I want to do. Like I had seen a few movies back in, the 80s, Crossing the Switchblade, or some of the Billy Graham movies that would come out wherever, they would all end with the person getting saved at a Billy Graham crusade or whatever. And I'd seen some Christian films. They were just starting to kind of become a thing that wasn't that was a little more mainstream, but this is before Passion of the Christ, before that became kind of a money-making thing for Hollywood. And so I just saw the potential for like telling really good stories from a Christian perspective. And I happened to be doing a Bible study at the time that encouraged me also. It's a longer story, but I ended up basically just dropping architecture and going to film school. But in that process got some similar feedback as Anne, where it's like, wait, you're going to go to Hollywood? Wait, what? And, even my dad, who's been very supportive, his first reaction was, my son's going to go make Christian films. And I said, no, Dad, I'm a Christian and I'm going to go make films. There's a difference. And still, what's funny is that was 30 years ago, and I still have to say that. Like, it's crazy how entrenched this is in the church that like we have to make content that is baptized, that is sanctified somehow by putting a cross on it or by putting a Bible verse on it, and that then makes it okay, as opposed to if you're going to become a doctor, people don't say you're going to become a Christian doctor. Like if you're
Yeah.
going to become an engineer, they don't say you're going to become a Christian engineer. But if you say you're going to become a filmmaker or a theater actor, it's like, oh, you're going to do Christian films or you're going to do Christian. It's like, no, I'm just going to be a filmmaker. Like, and I'm a Christian, yes. And so that will influence a lot of my decisions, but there's this weird thing with the arts where people want to segregate it and keep it over here in this like sacred space and keep it away from the secular space, and that was what Anna and I connected on, and we were just like we basically did the documentary to meet our people because we were like there's other people out there, we know
We know they have to be out there.
they have to be out there. And I was like, yeah, have you heard of the Rabbit Room? And I'm wearing a Rabbit Room hat right now. But, I'm like, have you heard of the Rabbit Room? And she's like, I can't remember if you had heard of it or not at that point. But, we started sharing stories about, oh, well, there's these people. And I think you told me about Fellowship of
United Adoration. Yeah.
or in Fellowship of Performing Arts
Oh,
in New
yeah.
York City and the Lambs Players Theater in LA. And, LA or San Diego.
San Diego. Hmm.
San Diego. And, we just started sharing and we're like, okay, we need to like go interview some of these people and like make a documentary because I've read all these books about art and faith and nobody's reading them. Like the church needs to be talking about this. So we just got excited and started making a quote unquote documentary, which then turned into a series, which, we had no idea we'd still be working on, 6 years later or whatever it is.
I'll admit, when I first came into that meeting at church and they said we're going to have this discussion about the arts and Christians in the arts, my radar went up a little bit. Like, what is that? Because we had just started attending the church like maybe a year prior, and I'm like,
Oh,
what?
really?
I'm
Oh,
like, I'm like, what does that mean here? Are we going to be getting a hour long talk about Carmen? And I will say, revisiting the first episode again too, just a few weeks ago, I was sold in the opening credits when you're mentioning people like Terrence Malick, Scott Derrickson, who his movie Sinister was voted the scariest movie ever made. There's like a scientific study done, and he's a strong Christian. Josh Larson pops up in the first episode, and I had just gone to see him talk about horror movies at U of M like a few weeks before that. So I was really impressed right out of the gate. Like, oh, they are actually going to talk to people who are doing some interesting things. I am sure that was a great experience to get to connect with these people. I mean, they kept popping up. Like, I was just listening to Sho Baraka's newest album just the other day, and to see him pop up in the third episode, I was like, oh, I love him. And I'm sure it was like a checklist of, oh, I've always wanted to talk to this person. I've always wanted to talk to this person. So were they
Yeah.
pretty eager to talk for this?
Yeah, it depends on, there's still some on our list that we're waiting to get to. But yeah, I mean, most everybody once you get one or two, they recognize each other's names. So it's
Mhm.
like actually the first person we were going to talk to was Max McLean from Fellowship of Performing Arts.
and we still haven't
And
talked to him
and we
yet.
still haven't talked to him because it got canceled from COVID. He was going to be in Ann Arbor to do either Screw Tape Letters or one of his C.S. Lewis plays, but he was going to be at Ann Arbor, and then it got canceled because of COVID, so we didn't end up interviewing him. But yeah, once when we had some one or two people agree, we can then use their name to go get other people.
But the list
But
started as a like I just want to talk to these people. It was like a fan list. Like we're like super fans of all these people's work. So
Mhm.
we want to talk to them and see. And we had a feeling that we would be hearing a similar themed things, which makes it easy to do a documentary when the same stuff comes up from all these different amazing people. It's like okay, it's easy to connect all the dots on those.
yeah, and we'd seen there was a documentary or a docu-series that actually the Mormon Church did through the BYU TV channel or something. But every episode is very similar because they and it's cool. I enjoy it, but it's like an artist. It's basically focused on the artist, but then it's like they all have this similar journey, right? It's like,
Mhm.
and so every episode is very almost the same story, but with a different person. And so I really wanted to organize the documentary around themes. And so let's interview everybody and let's collect everything they had to say about, this one little theme in this 3 to 5 minute section. And so that's why we have these like segments about, sacred versus secular, or a segment on, connecting with the creator in nature or whatever. But we have a similar journey and we're built in similar ways and our brains work in similar ways. And so trying to see like what is the life of the artist and as a Christian, and what are some similar themes that we all have to wrestle with. And then we ended up ordering it around, Jesus's ministry. And okay, these are things he did. Like, he connected with his father by going off into nature. So we're going to do a segment on that. And then we've got segments coming up about like how he healed people and how art can heal people. And that'll be in a coming episode. But, it's kind of ordered around how can we as Christian artists lead a Jesus-like life with our art, and how can our ministry of art be similar to Jesus's ministry. So
It's interesting talking about kind of this hesitancy in some Christian cultures to talk about engaging the arts. I'm wondering how much of that is fear and how much of that is, we just have to be direct with the message and give them the point by point formula so we don't make sure truth is lost in metaphor, when that's exactly how Jesus often worked, was through metaphor and stories that didn't necessarily make sense.
Yeah, it's a long-standing tradition of Protestantism. You talk about Methodists, there's a method, right?
Mm-hmm.
So very much trying to put things together in a very simplified way that everyone can understand the gospel. Which you really want people to understand the gospel. I have no problems with that. But at the same time, there doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for the creative. So
Mm-hmm.
putting everything into a box so that it's very similar and constructed in a way that's simplified, gets straight to the point. You need to believe in Jesus. This is what he did on the cross. And Jesus kind of blew that out of the water when he came, because he went straight to the religious people and told them things that they couldn't understand in ways that they couldn't understand it. He didn't make it real simple for them. They had to dig a little. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, you did. You did. It makes me think about a comment that's made in one of the episodes, moving from belief language to beholding language.
yeah.
That we're not just my friend Bob. He's in a band. He's a singer songwriter. He's a fantastic singer songwriter. And he was telling me about a quote he heard from Bono, that a lot of people like to sing about the light, and he encourages people to sing from the light. Like,
Oh,
it
that's good.
doesn't have to be this little sermon that's put to, a sermon on film or a sermon in music. Christians deal with all this. This is, all of life is the Christian life. And it's good to get all of that out there and process that in a way that helps us understand God, that helps us understand each other better.
Yeah, and there are
yeah,
seminaries set up and coursework done and books written so that we can get the answers. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we so want to know the answers when maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe we should be like asking more questions.
Yeah, we have to be more open to mystery.
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, that's ultimately the quote. It's funny you picked out the beholding and believing quote. I was thinking of from was it from that same episode? But when no, I think it's from episode 3, when Jeremy Slager says, the church, the arts are scary to the church because I'm paraphrasing him here poorly, but that the church is good at making everyone think the same,
Mm-hmm.
and the arts are literally trying to make us think differently. And so trying to give people, and so yeah, the church, just the institutions in general, not just the church, but when you think of a community, it's centered around what we share in common and what we agree on. And if you think of a museum, it's like, and everyone's standing in front of a piece of art looking at it. What's interesting isn't what we agree on. It's the different things we see in the painting, or the different way that it affects us. And I think in a church setting, that's a little scary. It's like, let's all huddle around this work of art and have different reactions to it. I think it just doesn't doesn't serve the purpose of an institution very well. It serves to kind of disperse as opposed to congeal. I think it's scary. I think fear is a huge part of it. I don't know what happened. I wasn't around in the, in the 40s and 50s, but I know, this whole kind of purity culture, not the like purity culture of the 80s, but that kind of beaver cleaver, like we're all going to be good little Christians, and we're
Hmm.
gonna act a certain way, and we're going to dress a certain way, and rock and roll is bad, and dancing is bad, and that kind of temperance culture, or whatever you want to call it, I think saw artists as being outside, as other, and as being outside of that, and art became this thing for, kind of the long-haired hippies, and that's just not us. And so I think, yeah, again, I think we probably tend to, Anne and I especially, can go down that road of, you know, being almost too critical of the church because we've been so close to it for so long. But we both care deeply about the church, and that's why we're doing this. I mean, it's not a nail on the door of the church saying, we're leaving you because you don't love the arts. It's like, wake up, church, like love
Hmm.
the arts, appreciate even the arts of non-Christians that are saying deep and powerful things that can inspire your faith and can lead you closer to God. So yeah, I think we tend to start with kind of the negative approach, but I always feel bad because I don't want to be known as the guy who just, shouts at the church.
No, I've been that guy a lot. I've gotten frustrated in the past with the same thing you guys are talking about when you're gonna act in movies. Oh, Christian movies, right? Are you gonna yeah, are you gonna go to Broadway? Oh, Christian circles of Broadway, right? I review film, and I'm still asked. My mom knows I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm still asked, have you seen this particular really niche faith-based movie? And I'm like, I did. I didn't like it, Mom, and I don't think it represents our faith as well as I would want. But have you seen this? I think you'd like that. Oh, I can never see that. It's rated R. And but it is. I mean, I didn't think there was negativity in the series at all. I think it is a very encouraging call to Christians to be creative. And when you see that happen in Christian circles, that's an extremely powerful thing. Like we have a open mic night at our church once a month, and I finally was able to attend one about a month ago. And to sit there and see all these people who I know every week, from shaking their hands in the service, get up and they're singing songs that are just revealing a new side of them, a painting that makes me see something about them that I didn't know was there, and we're all celebrating each other and encouraging each other to share. And it's such a good way of building fellowship and understanding people better.
Yeah, it is definitely. Yeah, I have a Zoom online Bible study that meets
Hmm.
the second and fourth on a Monday night. And it started out as a life group through my church. And I said, can I just have a Zoom Bible study life group? That they were looking for life group leaders. And I said, I'd like to have a life group, but call it Creative Life Group. So whoever's interested in, talking about the Bible, when we read the Bible, we're going to be talking about the creativity of God in it. And we want to encourage people that are creative to join. And I recently had a lady that she had a gallery at one point in Grand Rapids, and she had recently just gotten some mental illness or something had happened, and she just got really frustrated. She decided that God didn't want her to paint anymore, and she broke her brushes and she just threw everything away. And a lot of it had to do with she wasn't painting religious things, but she was getting a little flack from the Christian community and her church that she wasn't. But her stuff was not, she wasn't painting, you know, anything egregious or nothing
What?
gratuitous. It was beautiful nature. It was puffins and things like that. And she had her pictures in the background of the Zoom, and she was show. And the rest of the we had like 7 or 8 people on the call, and they were like, "Oh, turn it around and let me see." And just seeing the things that she had put her energy and effort into like it took the whole Bible study in a completely different direction, just exactly what the Holy Spirit wanted us to talk about. And I was like, this is what it's all about. It's about seeing how God has wired people and seeing how they express it in their creative ways, and giving people encouragement that they can do the same. Even if they're not quote unquote an artist, they're still created to create something to bring beauty and goodness to the world.
That actually came up pretty early in our discussions too of like, is this a documentary for artists? And it was like we pretty quickly were like, no, this has to be, we want to interview artists. We want to put them kind of up on stage because the church often doesn't give them that space. But uh, this is really about everybody. And when we talk about creatives and artists, those are two different things. Like creatives is everyone. Like humans are creative. So whenever anybody says something about creatives, like as a noun, I'm always like, oh, so you mean everybody? Because we so often just think artists are the creatives, and I think what's cool about this series and the Bible study that we have that goes along with it is really helping people find their creative purpose, because everyone has one, and we talk about first episode talk about a mom that's or a grandma that's in her garden, or a mom or a dad who stays home with their kids, and they're bringing order into the chaos, bringing light into the darkness. They're doing what God did in creation. And even accountants, making spreadsheets. So that's always our example, because I can't think of anything that is more different than the way my mind works than an accountant. But but they are creative. Like they are creating spreadsheets out of nothing. They're making order out of chaos. And they're creating relationships with clients, and they're creating, creating beauty in numbers. Like there's actually a guy we tried to interview that does art with math.
Oh, wow.
I think that's really cool. And he works for NASA, and he actually is like their lead artist, and he does like these sculptures at the NASA headquarters that takes data from satellites and turns it into art and stuff. It's crazy, but it's like creativity isn't limited to the arts. And so I think open mic nights and chances for people, artists, to share in the church is obviously a huge win. But I think when I when I know we've won is when the accountants in the church are like, yeah, I'm creative.
Mhm.
Like God's a creator and I'm made in his image. Like that's when I know, when that's just kind of an obvious, like when we were gonna start with episode 2, honestly, but then everybody I talked to, when I said the words created to create, and they were like, huh, I've never heard that. That's really cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need to start there. Like we need an episode 1 that just talks about the fact that we were created to create. Like this needs to be an obvious known thing in the church, just like John 3:16. It's like the very first chapter of the book says we were created in his image, and then he said go and do likewise. It's like, so anyway, that for me is the exciting part, is that this isn't just a docuseries for artists. And this isn't just a message for artists. It's a message from the artists, because they do have a unique way of already doing this, but we all need to hear it. So
I'm glad you mentioned that first episode in the Created to Create, which is also on your shirt, I should point out for all our listeners. Which I'm sure, can you buy that at creativeicons.tv?
Yeah, we will have we do like a periodic what do you call pop-up store for that.
Okay.
We pretty much take them around with us when we show things places, but yeah.
send us an email, we'll get you one.
We'll
There
get
we
you
go.
one. Yeah. We have some new designs too. We have like
Yes, we do.
new
Nice.
colors, new designs. Yes.
But the thing you mentioned, I think picturing God as a creator, as someone who's making something from nothing, is such a it can be a refreshing way of looking at God instead of this kind of angry sitting in the clouds. I was just reading Jeffrey Overstreet's book, Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema, and he talks about this lecture he attended by Andy Crouch, who has written a lot about
Mhm.
culture making and things like that. And he points out that when you study the Genesis accounts, there's almost no use of the imperative in those accounts. It's not God commanding, let there be light, ordering it. It is, when you look at it, it's the verb, the phrase is the jussive form of the verb, which is kind of this invitation to possibility. It's God basically saying, let's try this out. He's talking to himself among the Trinity. Let's try this out. Let's just do this. And it's such a picture of, I think, why creativity is so good in community. It's often, even if you're not a quote unquote creative person, like you said, everyone is, but if you're not making art, you are still engaging art. And one thing I love about this series and the fact that there's a guide to go along with that is it works both for Christians who are, hey, what do I do with this gift God's given me? And people who may have never thought, you know, the thing I do on Sunday nights, going to a movie or watching a TV show, this can help me learn more about God. This can help me learn more about my neighbor. And I love that it's set up in that way.
Yeah, definitely. It's the second episode that we're talking about nature, Thomas Merton, and
Mm-hmm.
how he would connect with the Lord, and in the silence and I mean, going beyond the idea of an act of spiritual, like the disciplines and the methods and the things that we do to connect with God, and that is like opening up the idea that there are so many things and places that you can connect with God. And we always talk about there's no such thing as secular, because
Mm-hmm.
there's only sacred and there's desecrated. And so if the place isn't desecrated, if the thing isn't desecrated that you're engaging in, then certainly it's a sacred space, And you can find God there and meditate on the Lord there and get closer to him in all those places.
Was it Madeline Langle? Do you guys quote her in this? I know you have a whole episode about her, but
Hmm.
did you guys quote her when she said all good art is religious art? Um, and I love that. Actually, within a week of rewatching that first video and reading something else, I was reminded of Walking on Water and had to go to the library right afterwards to check it out because I had never read it. And I was just telling my wife yesterday, I'm like, I'm gonna have to buy this book because I know I'm gonna read this again. This is such
Yeah.
a good book. Doing the interviews over the course of these last few years, was there anything that stood out and surprised you and changed maybe your thinking about things?
So many things. Um, well, it's funny. I mean, really, I'm thinking of actual changes to the documentary itself. I mean, it was originally called Prophets of Now,
Hmm.
because I was thinking prophets of old, and now and how the prophets of old were like crazy, performance artists,
Performance
basically.
artist.
They were stripping down to their undies and or less, and and you know and doing this performance art, marrying prostitutes, and like doing all this, like to say, church, look at this visual representation of what you've done, and so thinking of artists today as prophets, and then we kind of, I realized that the word prophet has a lot of um, baggage associated with it, and then you get into prophecy and speaking in tongues, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff that not all Christians can jump on that bandwagon right away easily. Talking to, I forget who it was that basically was made it bigger for me, like this isn't just all about prophecy, or like God has something to say and he's going to say it through you. Like basically that almost feels too utilitarian. I think that was one of the things that for me really stood out throughout this process, is feeling the utility of art is one thing that the church has really focused on in our society. I mean, arts funding is always the first thing to get cut, even in secular
Mm-hmm.
spaces, because it's not useful. Or if it isn't useful, if this art is just pretty, or if it's
Yeah.
just there to make a statement or something, then it's seen as less than. And we're such a capitalistic kind of society where it's like you get something, it's there's an exchange that always happens. And so with art, just the act of creating itself being sacred, I think, was one thing that I hadn't really thought through. And it doesn't necessarily have to say something useful to anybody else. Like it can just be for the artist. It can just be like I want to act like my creator today. So I'm gonna create something. And obviously we don't want to hide that creation from others. I think God wants us to share it, but I think sometimes it's just almost like a contemplative discipline for us to create, and it doesn't necessarily have to be for the market or for to be consumed or to change people's lives or to share the gospel or to do like it can just be like you know God made chickadees and anteaters, like
Mhm.
that wasn't to share the truth about Jesus. It was because he creates out of his own love and his love of creation and his love of creating. And so yeah, we can just create like she was saying puffins and we don't have to paint Jesus on the cross to be fulfilling our calling. We can just be creating.
I think about God as my heavenly Father, and I'm the kindergartner making the stick figures for him.
Mm.
I mean, no matter how advanced my art might be, it does. I mean, he's God. The person that created the anteater and the puffin and all those things, and I'm trying to make a representation of something to show him. It's going to be inferior. There's nothing that I can do or show him, but yet he looks at my feeble attempts at whatever it is I'm doing, and he says, "Wow, that's so great." He's my father. He wants to encourage my creativity. He's not going to say, "No, that's not as good as so and so over here. This 5-year-old doing better job than you are." We're the ones that do that. We compare ourselves with others, but it's really all about him and what he wants us to do, and the joy and the excitement that he feels when his creation does what he does, creates.
Yeah, just create and God will put it on his fridge. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I remember us talking about that. I can't remember which of us came up with that, Anne, but I love that image
It
because
was
we were
you.
talking about, was it me? I no, because I thought it was you, so whatever.
Oh,
But yeah, this image of like whatever you create, God just like puts it on his fridge with a little magnet and he just stands there and looks at it like,
Mm.
man,
you
my kid
tickled
is
pink. Yeah.
like, look at what my kid did. Like, that's so cool. And I think, yeah, we tend to look at the person next to us and look at what they're creating and be like, oh man, I mean, I watched, yeah, Terrence Malick or I watch Martin Scorsese and I'm like, can I even call myself a filmmaker? Like, and God's like, what are you talking about? I have your little short film on my fridge, and I think it's encouraging, but it also is confirming from a calling standpoint that we don't have to necessarily look at the results of the worldly results to know whether we've succeeded or not. If God's called us to do something and we do it, then we've succeeded. And honestly, if God's calling you to do art and you're not doing it, this is one thing that somebody said along the way to to keep answering your question. Somebody said this along the way, and I was like, ouch. But they said, if God's calling you to do art, or do a specific project and you're doing something else, then you're sinning.
Mm.
And I was like, oh geez, because I have so many unfinished projects that God has literally called me to do, and I'm constantly off making money or, doing very valuable things that are not necessarily what he's calling me to do at that moment. And so that was definitely something that came along. I can't even remember who said it, but that one hit me.
Mm. So one thing I remember hearing this a few years ago, there was a study done by 538 that they examined all the worship lyrics being used in modern congregations, and they found that positive language farly outweighed negative language. You were going to church and you were singing "Oh Happy Day," not "Oh Crappy Day," right? Um, but and I've always felt like the church has often not made space for harder truth, for art that wrestles with that, maybe not always in the congregation either, but you look at a movie like, to bring up Martin Scorsese, Taxi Driver, which is about a person struggling with demons and loneliness, and that is also worthy of exploring. We had Rachel Wilhelm come to our church a few months back and sing songs of lament that she had written. And so I appreciate that in episode 3, you're talking to Ruth Naomi Floyd, who is singing these beautiful jazz songs that are coming from a place of legacy of heartbreak, but also healing. I love that you made space for that. And I think that is a highlight of the episodes I've seen.
Yeah, we were talking about how should we release the first three because it ends with Ruth Naomi Floyd and talking about lament and making space for that and tears and collecting your tears in a bottle,
Hmm.
all those topics that are kind of like a place to sit in this sort of not sad place, but not happy and joyful and typical CCM rock and roll stuff, but the more people that you're not alone, and people that have seen it have said, I really think it's good that you have that in there, and it doesn't feel like you're ending on a low note. It just feels like, wow, this is a good place to
Hmm.
park ourselves for a bit. So maybe it is good that we stopped there for the first release part, and then we'll continue on with 4, 5, and 6, as the funding permits.
Yeah, we do have episode 4 funded, but yeah, so we are working on that. But yeah, the episode 3, I mean, it's hard. Your most recent episode is always your favorite, but I watching it again, in the theater and seeing people's reactions to it afterwards, and I'm just really proud of it because I think that one's really I talk about this series being my sermon because I was never going to be a pastor because my dad's a pastor, and this series is really my sermon to the church, which sounds kind of arrogant when I say it that way, but because it's really not me. It's all the books I've read and all the people we've interviewed. I'm just collecting it, but I'm collecting what they're saying that resonates with me. Like that's really when I edit, I'm like that resonates with me. It's going in there. Um, and oh my gosh, the digging deep into the soil of our humanity and and the fact that we are so broken is something that I think, yeah, the church hasn't done the best job at. And honestly, and also finding the joy in that too. Like, I think lament and joy are very closely linked. And I just don't know that, yeah, that the church has done a great job of allowing people to really do that honestly. And I think the honesty part is huge. And so anyway, yeah, I agree. I'm basically saying the same things over and over because I just I do love that episode and I love the concept of like hard truths. Like I really feel like if we oversimplify truth, it no longer is true. And so I really want to encourage artists, but also the audience. Like I always say, conscientious creators and critical consumers. Like we need to be critical consumers of art. And Christians typically are like, is it a Christian product? Then it's good. And is it a non-Christian product? Then it's bad. And it's like that's way too simple to be true. Um, and so like let's be critical consumers and let's watch the things that again with discernment. We always have to have discernment, but let's watch the things my wife can't watch certain things that I watch, and that's okay. But like let's watch the things that we feel okay about watching with discernment and become critical consumers and say, "Oh, I see God in that thing that's not Christian." And let's look at the Christian art and go, "Wait a minute, is that true? Is that what the Bible says?" Like don't just give it a pass because it's Christian. If it's bad art, it's bad art. Or if it's not true, if it's saying something not true, or if it's giving a half truth. Actually, okay, so this is a diversion. We're probably going to go over our hour, but
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I have nothing to do this afternoon.
so I think your listeners would enjoy this story. So I'm at a Christian film festival talking to a very successful Christian filmmaker, and you've definitely if you've been around Christian filmmaking, you've seen his films. And he's talking about how they're accused of being prosperity gospel because all their films have happy endings. And he said, well, that's not the case. We're not prosperity gospel. We just serve a good God. And I said, okay, I get what you're saying. I said, I'm gonna poke back a little bit. And I said, if you have a miracle, if you have a movie about someone experiencing a miracle, which there's a lot of those that come out where somebody experienced a miracle and they were saved from, they were saved from death or saved from tragedy or whatever. I was like, if I was ever asked to do a true story about someone who was saved by a miracle, I would make sure that that same film, somewhere in it, has a story about someone who wasn't.
Hmm.
Someone who was praying hard for their husband to be cured and he wasn't. Or someone who lost a child and they have no explanation. There's no good, God works all things for together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. Like they cannot justify that verse with what happened to them. We need that in that same movie, or else we're not telling the full truth. And he kind of was like, huh. And I hope that he took that with him. I don't know. He talks to a lot of people, and it was probably a bigger moment for me than for him because I was like, "Ooh, I'm talking to this famous person." But I was like, I really feel strongly about that. Like I've had people talk to me like, "Oh, you should tell my life story," or "I experienced this miracle, and you should make it into a movie." And I'm always like, I got too many ideas anyway. But if someone had a pile of money and was like, "Make my story into a movie," if it's a miracle story, I want that other side of the story to be in there because the truth is we serve a good God when he doesn't answer our prayers. And we serve a good God when he does. And so if we're only telling one half of that, it's not truth. It's half truth. And and that's where I think a lot of Christian movies and Christian art in general goes off the rails because it wants so hard to prove that God is good that it won't tell the hard stuff. But that's where his goodness really shines, I think. When you're in that moment where you're like, I can't explain this away. Like, this is tragic. I can't say there's no tangible reason for me to look at this and say God is good. Yet I do. And that's what Shobaraka talks about in the episode, like sometimes you just have to like it, and that's faith, right? If it doesn't take faith, then it's not faith. And if it's obvious that God is good and yeah, it always works out, then that's not faith. So anyway, that's something that I feel really, really strongly about that I think if that one thing, if I could say one thing to Christian filmmakers, whenever I have a chance to meet anybody of influence like that, I'm gonna retell that story because I feel like that's something that our industry really, really needs. That's
No,
my
that hit.
that was my sidebar, but I've gone so far that I don't remember what the original question was.
No, but that hits on a frustration I've had for years. It's when there's the movie where they say, God, we will praise you even if we don't win the football game, even if the coach's wife can't have a baby. And then they win the football game and the coach's wife has the baby, and you're like, well, show me them still loving him when they don't get that. And that comes up over and over. And I think it is more truthful to realize that sometimes God's plan doesn't result in, what we would assume to be our prosperity. There's something better in store, and we can dig for that. I wonder. Obviously, right now, church culture is in a weird place. Like, there's a lot of division. There's a lot of, you say you're a Christian to someone, and there are 20 different things where even the people who you would think, hey, we're Christians together, they would be thinking, well, you're not a Christian. Um, but I wonder if art is that thing that can help people to have those conversations between people who believe and people who don't believe in a way that tears down some of that tension. I think a lot about people who I know would not go into a church to hear a sermon, but they're perfectly okay with the fact that, yeah, I'm going to write a movie review, which is going to cover whatever's out right now. But I'm also going to be open about how it moved me as a person to faith. And they find that interesting. And I think there's that safe space of we're going to discuss this piece of art and let that open whatever doors it opens.
Yeah, like in one of the interviews we had with Roberta Amundsen, she's talking about the you can disagree on all sorts of things, but you see something of beauty. So you see
Mm-hmm.
a a sunset. She uses example of a sunset, and no matter what you opposed another person with another person, whatever you're arguing about, you can both agree that that's a beautiful sunset, right? So there's like a
Hmm.
place to start in art where we might be able to find some common ground. Well, what do we disagree on? Yeah, we all we talk about is what we disagree on. That's what you hear on the news. That's what you hear on everything. Well, this is my side. This is your side. My side is right. Your side is wrong. Us, them. But isn't that, like Sophronia said, the language of beholding, or as Roberta said, the beauty of the sunset? We can, like, beauty is one of those things that we should be seeking instead of our rightness. Like
Hmm.
our our side and and showing how right we are. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
No, that goes back to that Madame Langle quote too. Like our job is not to tell the other side we're wrong; it's to show them a light that they can't deny and want to know what that is.
yeah, yeah. So let's
Yeah.
Um,
talk about, and even if we never get to the point where we agree on politics or we agree
mhm.
on anything else, let's just start with what we do agree on, and let's kind of hang in there. let's
Yeah.
let's go there and sit in that place together and just behold together how beautiful something is or cool something is. And I mean, all art has the potential to do that. A great movie or a piece of visual art or a theater piece. And back to your other um, question about just the fullness of the human condition, like being human, being here, the way that God's allowing this to transpire. I mean, someday, of course, it's going to be different. There's going to be, the Bible tells us all different things that are going to be different. There's not going to be marriage. There's not going to be certain things that we are so concerned about down here on this planet, right?
Mhm.
So can we focus on those eternal concepts of what is beauty? What is God, want us to, the character things that we're supposed to have, that we're going to have for eternity. We're going to have love in abundance because He's going to be light. He's going to be all the light we need. Those kind of things. So like, why are we so focused on the negative and the stuff here that we don't agree on? And can we put it aside a little bit to just behold together and think about the eternal implications of what we're doing?
Amen.
Yeah.
I think too, just going back to Dead Man Walking, I mean, that is a very political film. It
Mhm.
was made by a very political filmmaker and who was trying to say something profound about the death penalty, but he did it in a fair way. Like as a film reviewer, I don't know if you're familiar with both these films, but Dead Man Walking versus Cider House Rules, like they came out at a similar time. I don't know if you remember
I
if you
remember Cider House Rules. I don't know if I ever saw it though. I know I've seen
okay.
Dead Man Walking.
So Cider House Rules was about abortion, and Dead Man Walking was about the death penalty. And I really feel like Dead Man Walking did a much better job of telling the whole truth. It really showed both sides of the story, even though the filmmaker had kind of an agenda. I think Cider House Rules was a beautiful film, but it was a beautiful piece of propaganda that really showed half the story of abortion. I mean, it really stacked the story against um, any sort of. I mean, it was like not to spoil it. The situation made it like really hard for anyone that is anti-abortion. It just made it just made it really hard.
It was one-sided
Yeah, it
completely.
was a one-sided portrayal, and it was a gorgeous film. But it's a gorgeous piece of propaganda, which I think is what most Christian films are, if they are even gorgeous. But they're, it's we can tell better stories if we really give both sides of this of whatever issue we're dealing with their best argument. Like let both sides shine. Let both sides of the argument really resonate so that people walk away without a pat answer and they walk away with questions that they can then take to God and or take, if they're not believers, they can take to themselves. But every good question is eventually going to lead you to God. Like the big questions all lead back to God. And so that's really my goal as a filmmaker is to make people ask those tough questions, not to give them answers because I don't. I feel like the Holy Spirit's job is to save people. My job is much smaller than that. So anyway, but to your question about like this division that we find ourselves in, certainly the arts can help us out of this, and I really don't know anything else that can. But even dialogue, we've seen how like people are just talking past each other. And in the past I would have said, we need more dialogue. We need more dialogue. And I still would like to believe that's true. But dialogue only works when people listen, and sometimes the only way to get people to listen is to show them art that puts their defenses down and they don't realize they're listening.
Seeing the world through someone else's eyes
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
crucial. Crucial.
That goes back to that Roger Ebert quote that's in there: or movies are machines that generate empathy," which is
Hmm.
one of my all-time favorite quotes from Ebert. And I love that. I love that, you can go to a movie and have an experience in someone's shoes that you haven't had, and it might make you think differently. To go to a recent movie that is about a hot topic issue. There was a movie, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, a few years ago that was about abortion. And it made me stop and think about, the human issues on both sides. And it was just stuck with these two girls who were going to, try and procure an abortion over state lines, and just focusing not on the political issues or the right and wrong of it, but just these two girls terrified and carrying each other's baggage through the whole thing.
Yeah, their
I thought it was
story.
really,
Hmm.
yeah,
I
Hmm.
haven't
I
seen
love
that one.
that.
I'll have to check that out.
Very
Yeah,
good movie.
that's good.
Um, do you feel, kind of to wrap this up? We started talking about how there was this fear in a lot of mainstream Christian circles about engaging art. Do you feel that's starting to change? Because I look at a lot of the people who you interview in this, and I'm like, you know, 30 years ago when I was a youth group kid, you would have had to stay between the lines and been a Christian author, a Christian movie maker, a Christian musician. And I'm surprised just to keep seeing people who they're not, Christian movie makers, Scott Derrickson, Show Baraka's stuff, encourages the church just as much as defends it half the time. I love his stuff so much. Do you think we're starting to see people be more comfortable with these conversations?
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. The problem is the market. And we're gonna get into this in a future episode, but the market is still separate.
Mhm.
It's really hard to release something that, whether it's music or film or anything that is basically in that middle space. Christian investors want to invest in evangelism, for good reason. Um, it films cost a lot of money, and if you're going to put a lot of money into a movie, you want to generate salvations. And I mean, it's again, it's that kind of transactional mentality. But uh, so the market still, I don't see it there necessarily. But like 21 Pilots, at least the lead singer, but I think um, all of them are Christians. I don't quote me on that, but I think U2's been doing it for forever, and people like, yeah, 21 Pilots, people are out there doing great stuff in the secular space, and they're just not being Lauren Daigle kind of crossed over from the Christian space and was able to make an impact in the secular space. And Switchfoot did the same thing in the 90s. So like what you see, I feel like music does it first, and then movies follow. And so hopefully we'll see that more in film, whether it's people coming from the Christian filmmaker side, like the Irwin brothers are starting to do more stuff that's a little, that's a little more, I guess, secular focused. But so you'll see some crossover people, but hopefully we'll just see more people like, yeah, Scott Derrickson and Martin Scorsese, who are doing amazing work. And you know, I think my fear is that our audience tends to be, not our audience for creative icons, but the people who talk like this, on podcasts like this, like, are resonating with ex-evangelicals more than they are with the
Mm.
church. And I really feel like the, what do you call it? The deconstruction movement really needs to be a reconstruction movement. Like, Like, unfortunately, the church has driven people out, and a lot of those people are deconstructing, considering themselves ex-evangelicals, and are no longer considering themselves believers in some cases. And I really feel like if the church doesn't kind of come this way a bit on the arts, we're going to see more and more of that. But if the church can embrace some of this, I think we'll have more of a reconstruction than a deconstruction. And that's my prayer is that the church would do some reconstructing, because it's pushed people out, to be blunt. And I think there's room for a lot more within that box than we've been told. Um, a pastor friend of mine said God's will isn't a tightrope, it's a meadow. And I've held on to that metaphor for a long time because, I think that the narrow path has made us feel like there's one right way to do Christianity, and I don't
Yeah.
think that's what that verse meant. And and I think there are boundaries to the meadow, but it's a wide meadow, that we can all find ourselves in, and some of us are going to be on this side of the meadow, and some of us, and with politics, it's a great example. I mean, there are great believing Christians who I know that are very politically right and very politically left, but they're all in the meadow, and we all need to appreciate that and move forward together as opposed to yelling at each other across the meadow. It's like let's move together and recognize that, hey, you're going to reach people that I can't because you think more like them, and let's just agree to, I hate the term agree to disagree, but like let's agree that we're both in the meadow so we can keep doing the work instead of trying to kick each other out.
Yeah, I think about it as a terms of improvisational acting. You know, when you're acting in an improv group or you have a improv exercise with actors, you don't, when someone comes up with some idea that comes randomly and you've never heard it before, you don't stop and go, you don't say, no, that's not a good idea. You have to encourage it. You have to say yes and then you add your bit to it. And even if you take it into a different direction, you know, and like in episode 3, Ruth Naomi Floyd talks about jazz, being jazz improvisation, being like, instead of saying that this is a wrong chord, you make it right by whatever comes next, you know. So I think there's an opportunity for art to do that. And to answer your question, like I said, I hope so. I see glimmers of it. I do see it. And then when we do find those artists that were the ones we're interviewing, you know, the ones we were finding, when we do uncover what they're doing, it's very hopeful. I feel like I think it's something that I think everybody needs to see, that it's possible. And that's generally what happens when we took our pilot episode to a lot of different Christian film festivals, different places. And invariably there would be someone at the end in the Q&A would say, this is something, I'm so glad you're saying this because this is me. You know, I've been teaching, you know, art for all these years in, you know, a Christian school, and I'm trying to explain to the headmaster of the principal of the Christian school that art is good. And, you know, she's like, this is like, can I take this and show this, you know, because I think it's like a tool for us to share this message that art is good and creativity is from God. And
I have to echo that by saying after you came and spoke to our church and showed us that first episode, I went home and was talking to my wife and I said, this is the kind of conversation I've been wanting churches to have my entire life. I was so happy that was a discussion happening in our church. And yeah, I love what you guys are doing. Tell people how they can see these episodes.
I've talked too much. You go, Ann.
no, I haven't. Right now, the way to see it and the way that we would really like for you to engage with it is go to Amazon and order our Bible study. It's called Unveil and Unleash Your Creative Purpose. Or you can go to the website, creativeicons.tv, and there's a way to engage with it there. But each chapter of the Bible study, there's 6 chapters in the Bible study with devotional activities in each one. But you start out watching a half of an episode and then going into the Bible study. So there's some lessons. You can go through it with your family. You can go through it with your church group, with a small group, by yourself. But it's really, it digs so much deeper than just what you see in the episode, and it also digs into the scriptures that are the foundation for what's under that, especially if there's people in the church that are saying, I don't know about that. What do you mean there's no such thing as secular? We can say, like, this is why we're saying what we're saying. We're not trying to be heretical. We're not trying to show you something different way. We're trying to show you what's here all along. So yeah, the best way to do is to do the Bible study with the QR codes, and the QR codes at the beginning of the chapter take you right to the video, and then you just have some nice questions and engagement and discussion issues and stuff.
All right.
Yeah, we purposely didn't include many Bible verses like in the episodes themselves. We want this to eventually be on Amazon Prime, and we want artists to find out that they were created to create by their creator, that may not care what the Bible says. And so we wanted to use quotes from Michelangelo and quotes from Wendell Berry and quotes from, recognizable artists, in the episodes themselves. But yeah, everything in there is backed by scripture. And so then we created this resource to go along with it that goes more in depth, into the scriptural support, and also just allows you to go deeper, and yeah, to unveil and unleash that creative purpose that we all have. So that's the idea.
All right. I love what you guys are doing. I'm hoping everyone goes and checks it out. Thank you very much for joining me today. I love this conversation. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you. This was great.